Well, hello everyone. It's Martin Lush here from a damp, cold December United Kingdom. I hope it is a bit warmer where you are. But firstly, a sincere thank you to you all. I think we all know what the rush to Christmas is like. So the fact that so many of you've dialed in that frantic rush towards Christmas when everybody's frantically busy, I think is really appreciated. And I think it probably indicates the considerable interest in this subject, which is how on earth do you break down these organisational silos. Also, apologies for the change in title. I came up with an atrocious title to start with, which was something to do with how to resolve conflict in the multinational blah, blah, blah. And when I read it, I thought, heck, what a shocking title. And then I thought, well, what is it you really need to talk about? In other words, you know, what common theme, certainly through this year, 2019, has come from so many of our clients, and whether it be big or small companies, the answer came back, Martin, we're having real struggles with organizational silos. You know, that's one of our key challenges. Now, what I'm going to do in the 30 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, is to give you, I just hope to get you thinking a little differently about how to break down silos that automatically and in some cases naturally build up in organizations. And looking down the list of participants, you know, lots of names I recognize there, certainly from big pharma companies to small startups. So this is a challenge that every organization faces. So I'm going to, based on my 40 years experience in the industry and a lot of the work that I've been doing with clients this year has actually come around to this subject. How do we go about improving collaboration? When everybody talks about the importance of collaboration, how do we actually get down to some practical aspects of how to do it? So I want to share with you a case study. This was based on a real life experience with a client that we've worked on through this year. So I really want to give you some practical guidelines, because some of you have seen this slide that I've used so many times before. I actually think, you know, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for many decades, as indeed do many of you. And I actually think this is, on the one hand, the most exciting. That's the people on the right, and sometimes feel I spend most of my time feeling and looking like that guy on the extreme right in the red shirt. But at the same time, it's the most uncertain time, whether it be politically, economically, professionally and industrially. So we face uncertain times. They're certainly not going to be dull, and there are certainly going to be some really, really tough decisions ahead of us. And you know, none of that is going to change, because these three things are all accelerating at the same time, and none of these are turning back. Global warming, unfortunately, the speed of technology and science is accelerating at a speed never ever seen before, as indeed is globalization. So for the first time in our history, all of these are accelerating all at the same time, all faster than ever before. Now, the reality of what this means in organizations, and in particular silos, will become evident later, because I'm sure many of you have experienced this year how a minor event, maybe in one of your suppliers or one of your departments or in one part of your business, what on the surface appears to be a very minor or small event can have a disproportionately big impact. Now, I spent a fair bit of this year with one of our clients who had a number of pain points. They had what the CEO described as decision-making table tennis. They had departments with opposing agendas. They had what he considered organizational constipation, excuse me, where everything seemed to be getting stuck. They had gone from a fairly risk-mature organization to one that had become very risk-averse. They were suffocated by overcomplexity. Problems weren't getting fixed. Internal conflict through emotions was becoming an issue. He realized that the energy and focus of his organization was more internal rather than external. In other words, the customers had been assumed, in other words, taken for granted. They had higher levels of firefighting than before. Innovation that was driving the business had virtually dried up, and profits and performance were actually being hit. And he hit the nail on the head. He said, look, we at the senior leadership team level recognize that one of the biggest challenges we face, and this is a business that had grown rapidly over a very short period of time, was the formation unexpectedly or unintentionally, at least, of organizational silos. That's where, as many of you know, where departments or functions or sites stick very much within their remit. They see the world very much within that remit. They don't look beyond their four walls. They don't look beyond the view of where the business is aiming, and so on. So he said, look, Martin, I have a real problem with silos, and I need something now. In other words, I know we have to, and there is work ongoing in changing our organization, in changing our workplace design so that it forces people to integrate more. I'm working on the leadership behaviors. I'm trying to make sure that there is collective objective setting. I'm trying to make sure that the rewards and remuneration packages drive the right behavior. I'm looking at how we develop people so that we move people between departments. I'm looking at how we recruit and induce people into the organization so that they are made aware of what others do for you and the importance of collaboration. I'm working on culture. I'm working on communication. But this is going to take time, Martin, and I need something now. I need something to force people to walk between the silos or navigate around them. But I need something now. And his key driving force, and he had no regulatory burning platform. In other words, his regulatory compliance record was okay, but as he said, that was primarily down to good inspection management rather than anything else. But the bottom line was that profits and efficiencies were being hit. Now, this move from traditional command and control structures, that hierarchy on the left-hand side, to one of collaborate and adapt, is something that not only industry is grappling with, but it's something that the military have already grappled with. And one of the points, I'm not going to give you all of the answers here, guys, but one thing I want to do is to give you some really practical examples of how to break down silos and actually get a business benefit quickly. Now, some of these ideas have been stolen, and this is if you still have time to send your wish list to Santa Claus, please include this book on that wish list. I've got a few other references as we go through. Fascinating book called The Team of Teams by a now retired General Stanley McChrystal. And General McChrystal was responsible, he was in overall command of forces in Iraq and I think later in Afghanistan. And what this book describes is how the US went into those war zones and then suddenly realized that the enemy they were facing was very, very different. And that their traditional modes of operating, which was typically command and control, was actually very, very quickly outdated and no longer fit for practice. In other words, going from command through to then command of teams and through to what he then describes as team of teams. And it's a fascinating description of how quickly and rapidly people can break down silos when there is a need, and how the benefits are very, very obvious and very, very quick to be seen. So this is not just a problem that we face in industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. It's a problem that is facing many companies in many industries and also many organizations, whether it be military or commercial. So a must-read for 2020. If you don't have time, let me know. I've actually summarized this book, and if you want a key point summary, I'm more than happy to send it on to you. So back to that question the company CEO posed me. Martin, I know we've got to tackle these organizational things, but what can you do quickly? Because we're not going to be around in 2 years' time unless our performance actually improves. So what did we do in 5 days? I just want to give you a sense of what is possible, because one of the challenges with breaking down silos is that you're going to kind of look and listen and think, well, you know what, I don't actually have that sphere of influence, Martin. I can't change the reward structure. I can't change the way our global organization sets targets. And that's why I'm not going to cover any of those, ladies and gentlemen, in this session. I really want to get down to some of the practical things that you guys can do on a day-to-day basis. If you want more information on collaborative goal setting, if you want more organization on how to change the structure of your departments, please let me know. But in 30 minutes, I just want to get down to some real fundamentals that you can hopefully pick up and take away and use. So what did we do in 5 days? We spent 5 days on site with a cross-functional team, representatives from all departments, not necessarily at the senior level either, sometimes 2 to 3 levels down, because you then tend to get to the truth or the honesty an awful lot quicker. You know, people tell you faster because these are the people, these are the folk that are actually suffering the pain and the inefficiency as a result of lack of collaboration. So what did we do? Well, we created a common purpose, a unified vision. I'm going to take you through that in a minute. We actually provided everybody with a what's in it for me. And some of you have already listened to my webinar and read my articles on behavioral change, and you'll be aware of the BMath model for behavioral change. You know, behavior is down to motivation. People need to be intrinsically motivated, which is you've got to give people a what's in it for me, otherwise they won't change. Why should they? The A stands for ability. In other words, you've got to make the new behavior easier, simpler, otherwise people won't change. The T of that BMath model, the T stands for the trigger, and the H of BMath stands for the habituation. So we actually use this model very regularly at NSF, and why? Because it works, and it worked in these 5 days. So again, go back to those webinars that I did on BMath, go back to the white papers that I've written if you need a refreshment. But we use this process, and I'm going to talk you through exactly what we did. So we created the common purpose, a unified vision around which people could coalesce. We provided them with a what's in it for me, and then we made sure that the systems that they had in place actually drove the right behavior. One of better communication, one of better collaboration. You know, people in organizations constantly are talking about how do we communicate better, how do we collaborate better, but they don't translate those into a habit, which is what we managed to do over these 5 days. Now, 5 days to achieve this was challenging, and I think I must point out that what we achieved remains work in progress, because silos are, in many respects, a natural human thing to do. That is to form groups of people, often, usually, in fact, like-minded people around you. So it's a very natural thing to do. So it means that as soon as you start to break them down, there will be some people in the organization who have a tendency, a desire to actually put them back in. So this is not a project. This is something that is always going to remain work in progress. So let's just walk you through the common purpose. What do we give this group of cross-functional key stakeholders as a common purpose? Well, we actually put up the profit and loss account, the financials of the business, and for many of them it was the first time they'd seen it. And we actually showed what the cost of complexity was to their business. Now, obviously I can't show you those figures, but what I will show you is a research article published a few years ago that actually showed profit being directly impacted. And this was a survey from approximately 500 pharmaceutical companies of varying sizes. And what the authors concluded was you have good complexity that actually improves performance, but it very quickly turns into bad complexity where the costs outweigh the benefits. And these authors, I do forget their names, which I do apologize for, but I can send those on to you. These authors actually concluded that in the pharmaceutical industry, Over complexity, silos that result from that complexity can account for up to 10.2% of profitability. And that is make or break for many pharmaceutical companies. But the success is worth the effort. Years ago, BASF, one of the largest chemical companies globally, actually introduced what they call their Verbund initiative, which translates into combined or collaborative. And in doing so, in other words, breaking down silos in each of their functional areas, they actually generated in excess of 1 billion euros saving. And that doesn't take into account the improvements in motivation, improvements in decision making. So bottom line is that it really is worth it. Another good book for your Santa Claus list, if you haven't read it already, fascinating book by Jim Collins, and as with all of his books, it's really underpinned by a huge amount of research. And Jim plots the 5 stages of decline of companies, and many companies are in this stage 3 of denial of risk and peril before they tip off the edge into stage 4, grasping for salvation, and stage 5, capitulation. And interesting, one of the key characteristics of stage 3 is, you've guessed it, organizational silos. Now, the company that we were working for that actually gave me the motivation for this webinar, we actually walked them through, we actually got them to brainstorm the characteristics of each of companies in each of these phases. And they were a company very much in stage 3. So the participants actually wrote down the characteristics from their perspective of being in this stage 3, this denial of risk and peril, because everyone had a vested interest in avoiding stage 4, grasping for salvation. That's not a nice place to be. And interesting, as you can see, center stage, so many of them put down silos. Martin, we have silos that are protected. We have silos that are causing internal conflict. So part of creating this single vision, this desire, this motivation to fix it, was to say to people, look, if we go back, look, remember, profits are impacted by silos, so everybody loses. Success is possible if we give this due consideration and attention, but if we don't, we're all going to suffer as we descend into stage 4, which is a very painful and very difficult place to get out from. So in giving people this single, simple and personal goal around which everybody can coalesce is really, really important when you're breaking down silos. You've got to have a message that transcends all of those silos, that means the same thing irrespective of where you sit in the organization. And this is how we described it. And for every pharmaceutical company, it doesn't matter whether you're big, small or medium, this applies to you. Your single purpose is to stay in business. It is as simple as that. Now, you can dress that up in any way you like, but you've got to stay in business. And that means you've got to make profit, it means you've got to protect your legacy and reputation, and it means that you've got to drive customer service. Otherwise, customers go elsewhere, in a box of time and resource that is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, what that means is that you've got to do more with less and do it faster. But the companies that will succeed will be the companies that maintain that balance. They continue, on average, to hit that sweet spot where they balance legacy, which is compliance, with profitability, with customer service. And if any one of those circles on that Venn diagram actually gets bigger than the others for a sustained period of time, your business is at risk. Now, we debated this with all of the meeting participants, and for the first time they realized that if they overdid compliance, what happens? Complexity goes up. When complexity goes up, risk goes up and profits come down. If they all focused on profitability, it's highly likely that your compliance will be impacted. So the job of each one of us, the job of leadership, the job of every supervisor is to ensure that for most of the time we stay in the middle. We hit that sweet spot. So the message we were giving these guys is, look, this is our goal. It doesn't matter whether you're in research and development. It doesn't matter whether you're in supply chain. It doesn't matter whether you're in quality or operations. Your job is to ensure the business stays in business in an environment that is changing very, very quickly. We then went on with this group to say, look, if this is our due north, and bearing in mind we haven't even talked about silos yet, but this is giving you the model that they coalesced around. And I want to give you some practical tools and techniques, but they came around this model. So we said to everybody, look, that's our due north. Doesn't matter what department or group or site you're operating in or at. Our objective is to stay in business, is to balance those three components. Now, our movement to hit that due north is not a straight line. We're going to be hit by events, some of which are predictable, some of which are not. Now, one thing is for sure next year, you and your businesses, your departments will be hit by something that could be legacy threatening, could be business threatening that you had never ever planned for. So the ability to be adaptable is really, really key. So the first time in this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, adaptability, resilience became was mentioned, because we then went on to really emphasize that adaptability is now more important than efficiency. Now remember that. We're going to come back to that later, because the old hierarchy, the traditional hierarchy, was actually designed around the desire to be more efficient. Now, however, going back to that team of teams, we need to be more adaptable. So adaptability, that is our ability to take hits from unexpected events and to bounce back stronger, is really, really, really important. We then went on to really emphasize, and I love this quote I often use, is that extraordinary companies and also extraordinary peoples don't do extraordinary things, they just do ordinary things to an extraordinary level. Remember that. Extraordinary companies do ordinary things to an extraordinary level. We then asked the group to say, look, if agility is really, really key, if collaboration is really, really key, if failing fast and failing well is fundamental to our success, and if innovation is what is really driving everything, what is it we need to do exceptionally well in order to balance those three components? And what they actually came up with our guidance, and I truly believe in the 80-20 rule, these are the 20% of things, if you can call them things, that convey 80% of importance to your organization. So if your businesses actually do these exceptionally well, you will get to and maintain due north. If you don't, you'll miss it, and your businesses are vulnerable. So doing these, what I call basics to PhD level, doing these ordinary things to an extraordinary level are really, really key. Now, there was education, change management, risk management, our ability to solve problems, that's the deviation and kappa system, and an obsession with simplification are fundamental to the success of your business. Now, what the heck do these have to do with breaking down silos? Well, we then took each of these and in 5 days, remember, actually said, right, how do we need to educate rather than train our people? And in doing so, also break down organizational silos. How do we manage change better and faster than anything we've ever done before, and break down silos? And similarly for risk management and similarly for problem solving, and we'll touch on simplification at the end. Now I'm going to give you a couple of illustrations, ladies and gentlemen, on how we used each of these to do two things. Number one, break down organizational silos without even talking about organizational silos and breaking them down. And number two, getting immediate business benefit. So some of you have already listened to my webinar, I think I did last year, on education, the 10-20-70 model, or 70-20-10 model. Now, this is, for many of you, not new news, but this is a model that ensures education is taken outside the classroom. So we used this model to not only dramatically improve the competency of their workforce, but in doing so, actually breaking down silos that existed within the business. Now, the 10-20-70 model actually is just a metaphor for how much time you use in each of these areas. So the 10% of contact time, or 10% of your resource, is actually getting across the must-know. And this typically is through structured courses and programs. The 20% is the immediate practice and application, and I do mean immediate practice and application. And the 70% is learning in the workplace. So what that says is that most learning that sticks and can drive continuous improvement actually is done outside the workplace. So jumping straight to that 70%, we took a group of autoclave operators, people operating sterilizers used in aseptic manufacturing. We took them through a course on good autoclaving practice. And the 70%, in other words, the learning done outside the classroom, involved these elements. And if you want to see what the others, ladies and gentlemen, just go back to my webinar that I did previously covering, it was entirely dedicated to this subject. We got them to design a simple 6-point checklist for loading autoclaves. Some of the participants got involved in train the trainer. All of the participants got involved in doing deviation investigations and self-inspections. They drove simplification processes. They actually drove operational improvements. They did lunch and learn sessions. They did SOP development. Some of them went into coaching and mentoring, and so the list goes on. This gives you a flavor of the learning that can be done, the most important learning, in fact, that can be done outside the classroom. Now, in getting to that stage, that involved very close collaboration with colleagues in research and development to understand how the cycle was developed and why packaging material was designed in the way that it was so that steam could penetrate and air could be removed. It involved close liaison with colleagues in engineering and in tech support, in pack development, in QA, in the validation group, as well as equipment suppliers. So this was a real example of, although the objective was to design an education program that allowed information to stick, and therefore really improve workplace performance using the 10-20-70 model, the hidden benefit, and I would argue the bigger benefit, was actually in breaking down organizational silos. Now, how that was achieved and consolidated we will cover later, but it just gives you an illustration. Another one, ladies and gentlemen, related to the change management system, where taking a very similar group from regulatory affairs, development, validation, we got them together in a room for half a day, and we said, we posed them a number of questions around, look, if a change happens, what factors do we need to consider? You know, from impact on key quality attributes, impact on critical control points that had a direct impact on those key quality attributes, the regulatory components, etc., etc. So that cross-sectional group of people from multiple departments actually played an integral role in developing those impact assessment forms, in developing the decision-making process to assess the significance of change, whether it be to do with safety, quality, efficacy, or cost, or supply chain. They designed the decision-making criteria, they designed their risk assessment threshold, and they simplified the process. Now, I've highlighted simplification there because that was the last one on the, you know, what are the fundamentals that we need to do to PhD level. Simplification is here, and it is here to stay. And I think it's fair to say that companies that obsess about simplification, companies that make it part of their DNA, those are the companies that will be around in 10 years' time, 5 years' time. Those that allow complexity to rule will not be. So simplification has to be a way of life. And one of the beauties of obsessing about simplification is, guess what? It forces you to break down silos, because you can't simplify without collaboration. Because simplification is a great unifier. Everybody has a what's in it for them, because everybody benefits from a simpler world and a simpler SOP and a simpler policy. And I've written about this many, many times, and I can send you those articles on our 5-6 step simplification process. You get a small group of smart people together, representatives from all stakeholders, agree on the core purpose, which is to achieve that essential balance that we were talking about earlier, process map reality, remove any steps that are adding no value, and finally protect what you have created. So when you obsess about simplification, it forces you, remember our BMath model, you've got to have systems that force the behavior you're wishing to achieve or drive. We're wishing to achieve a behavior of breaking down silos. To do that, simplification is a really, really good unifier around that common cause. Other low-hanging fruit, ladies and gentlemen, as we bring this to a close, the group also created a networking directory, because one of the beauties of these various exercises was the realization that they didn't actually know who to contact when they had a particular problem. So they very quickly, and it only took one day, to create a directory on their intranet of subject matter experts so they could instantly have access. They made this year, 2019, and I think the same is going to be true for next year, their year of simplification. They had weekly FedEx days, FedEx delivering a day, so they would dedicate Friday to a simplification project. Could be an SOP, could be a policy, could be a process map, where they coalesced around the objective of simplification, and in doing so brought in stakeholders and subject matter experts from across the business. Their site incentive scheme was around simplification, brackets, silo busting. This forced them to have combined training events. They had a day in the life of, and that led to people from development coming across, or package development, or pack inspection, or engineering, just to spend 20 minutes describing a day in the life of. They also introduced a shadowing scheme where people would shadow different members of their business for a set period of time. They introduced a product team chat app so that they could instantly access and ask questions of people across the business using the technology that the apps gave them. So, ladies and gentlemen, key messages. When people talk about breaking down silos, that's kind of followed by, yeah, but we don't know what that means. What I've tried to give you here is some real practical tools and techniques that do break down silos, but also give you real business benefit. Remember that question asked by the CEO, Martin, I know we've got to change the organizational and cultural stuff, but I need something now, and I need something very, very quickly. So if you're going to do that, you've got to provide context. And the context is, if we want to stay in business, we've got to break down silos, because silos impact all of those pain points that I shared with you earlier. Remember that everybody needs a what's in it for me. And one of the beauties of the process that we took this company through was that everybody got something from it. A faster deviation and kappa system, a faster change management system, better risk assessment processes. Everybody got something from it, but in doing so, broke down silos. Remember to make the systems drive the right silo-busting behaviors. And remember that breaking down silos is always going to be work in progress. It is never going to go away, as indeed will not simplification. And remember, simplification is a great unifier, because you cannot simplify without collaboration. It forces those silos to break down. Now, I know this is an awful lot of information, ladies and gentlemen, in a very, very short period of time, so please drop me any emails, any questions you have, any resources you require, any additional references. Just let me know. I'll send them to you straight away. And finally, my New Year's resolution, I know we're not there yet, but my New Year's resolution is to do more webinars. I used to do them far more regularly than I have done this year. So that's really down to you, because I only want to do webinars that are adding value. So please let me know what you would like covered. And if it's in my sphere of competence, I will certainly do it. So future webinars depend very much on what you would like covering. So please think about those areas of pain, those areas that you have problems, those areas where you need a bit of disruptive thinking. Do it now, drop it on an email and send it to me, because if you don't do it now, you won't do it. So just remember, ladies and gentlemen, success very much looks like, it has to be moving from that very traditional hierarchy that a good 90–95% of businesses still have, to that team of teams. So on that note, can I take this opportunity of wishing you all a really, really great Christmas as you run exhausted towards the festive period. Really have a great time, guys, with your family and friends, and look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Thank you very much.